But now we're going to switch over to analyzing some of the games from the Anaheim Spring Championships. Take a look at 3 of the games. First, QXC versus Deer, then Cats versus Dragon, and then Pult versus Hyun. Of course, at the end, it's going to be viewer Q&A. So submit any questions you have to me at isaxslav on Twitter or under a YouTube comment under youtube.com/official MLGSC2. So first segment is going to be QXC versus Deer, talking about unit compositions in Terran versus Protoss. First, talk about how to properly defend a one-base Blink Stalker build, then how the mid-game compositions of each race interact with each other, and what compositions favor certain players at certain times of the game, and then finally, deciding where to engage your opponent and how important engagement positioning is in the game of Starcraft 2. So we'll start this replay off at the 3-minute mark. And we're going to notice QXC is actually going for a 1-base opening there at the factory before Command Center. So he's doing a very aggressive opening. On the same side of the things, we see Deer as well is actually proxying a pylon down here. So it looks like he's going to do a 1-base build as well. In fact, it's going to be a Twilight Council. So both players are playing a very aggressive, micro-focused early game style. But neither player knows the other one has done that yet. So as we fast forward through this, we're going to see QXC going for the very fast draw play. He's got Widow Mines, a couple Widow Mines out to defend. He's got a Hellion there. Now, Deer spots the Widow Mine with a Stalker when it dies. So that tells him that he needs observers. So he's going ahead and get the Robo. Now he knows that QXC opened up with 1 base and a delayed expansion. We can see the expansion going down here. Now, what's interesting here is what's more relevant is which player is more economic than the other. Yes, QXC is doing a very late expansion, but he's actually taking the role of the macro player because his expansion is before his opponents. Now, he doesn't know that yet, but as soon as he gets into this space and he sees all the buildings, look at this from QXC's point of view, he sees that the gateway's already up, 3 gateways up at this time, a Robo done as well, and of course he sees there's no natural with the Hellion there. He knows, okay, even though I opened with a 1-base build where I wanted to do a ton of damage to make things equal, now I actually don't. I mean, of course, damage is always nice to get extra damage done. As he got, a couple, I think, Stalker killed at the start and 2 probe kills with that Widow Mine there. Damage is always nice, but because his expansion is in front of his opponents, right? He has it done already here. His opponent hasn't have a Nexus quite started yet. He doesn't really need to do damage, but what he still wants to try to do is keep his opponent busy, because the longer Deer stays on his side of the map, that gives QXC a better chance to prepare his defenses on his side of the map. And of course, the most important thing QXC wants to do is he wants to be able to finish his command center. Because as soon as this finishes, he can lift it up and get to where it's safe in the main. As a Terran player, if you're harassing your opponent and your opponent's on 1 base and you're on 2, you almost never want to try to defend the low ground. So what you want to do is focus on the high ground. Get the bunker in the main, so the Stalkers blink up that they're deflected by that. Go for those tanks, the best defensive tool Terran has. And of course, just keep your units back. You have to defend a much smaller area if you tried to defend the natural as well as the blink up from your opponent to the main. So we see here that's exactly what QXC is doing. Gets that command sound out of there as fast as possible. Gets his defense back in his main. Anytime your opponent's ever doing a 1-base Blink Stalker attack, you want to focus on holding your main is step 1. Step 2 is go for siege tanks as fast as possible. Step 3 is protect the siege tanks. Make sure that it's difficult for your opponent to blink up onto those siege tanks. So you want to have your Marines near a siege tank, ideally a bunker or 2 around to help protect it as well. Then notice the building placement. You don't want the siege tank to be an area where the Stalkers can blink right on top of it. You want it to be forced where they blink up and they want to attack the siege tank. Maybe only 4 or 5 Stalkers can attack from this angle, but they can't really get in and all get to focus on a siege tank very quickly. So of course, Deer realizes QXC's defense is solid. He's going to go ahead and take his own expansion behind this. Now, he's going to be a little bit behind, but of course, if he can contain QXC to 1 base for a while, it does kind of counterbalance that fact that he's a little behind due to having the later expansion. So we're going to fast forward this just a little bit longer. And now we're going to talk about the mid-game unit compositions. Because neither player can get too much damage on the early game. You can see here, QXC is going to try a little draw play here. That can be nice. But what's important to note, QXC is mostly going for bio. Yes, he's getting a couple tanks to help defend and are going to be useful in the battle. But the important thing to note is the Marines. Now, Marines versus Stalkers, Sentry, Zealots, any gateway unit, early on, gateway units will beat the Marines. So if the Marines don't have stim pack, these gateway units, where the Stalkers are out over here trying to find a drop, drops in fact over here. The Sentry, Stalkers, Warping units will be stronger than the Marines if the Marines don't have stim pack. Without stim, They can't micro effectively against gateway units. Their damage output is much lower, and they're much less intimidating. But once QXC gets both stim pack and a decent medevac count, then these gateway units are much weaker. So right now, he has combat shield, but he has no stim. And it's going to take him about 3 minutes to get stim. It's going to take him another 1 or 2 minutes to get up a good medevac count. Until then, the gateway units are going to be a little bit stronger than him as far as compositional dynamics. So gateway units beating Marines before they have stim and medevac support. QXC knows this. He knows, okay, normally I want to play defensive now. Once it gets stim and medevacs, I can attack. But then he just saw Dark Templar. He's thinking, okay, my opponent expanded late and went for Dark Templar. He has to be very vulnerable right now, and I can go in and try to do a big attack and end the game. And if you look at the army sizes, I mean, right now he's up by about, it's at 600 total resources in army supply, and that's a good amount. Now, of course, when you're going up against Protoss, by the time you cross the map to get an extra warping or two, any units you build are on your side of the map. So this 600 resource difference will pretty much be equalized once QXC crosses the map. So it's going to be on equal resources, but his opponent is fairly stalker heavy. I mean, stalkers are weak in a direct engagement. So this attack could still work for QXC, but it's a little bit tricky because, again, there's no stim done yet. There's only one medevac. So the Marines aren't going to trade that amazing against these basic gateway units. What Deer's trying to do is he knows that, okay, my opponent might have a strong army now. If I can delay this push, then it's going to be much better because his army can't reinforce, right? Any units he makes crossing a map, right? They're crossing a map, take a while to get in there. Whereas Deer, he can warp in units immediately to help reinforce this defense here. Now, one thing, this is a pretty common situation. A lot of Terran players, they feel they're ahead. If they have tanks, they'll try to do this tank marine push. And the most important thing of a tank marine push is always the positioning. Now, the most important aspect of positioning for tank marines is this. It's that if your opponent has immortals, you don't want to let those immortals get close to the tanks. So your marines always have to be in between the immortals and the tanks, which is why sometimes it's good to put tanks on the ridge, but it's only good to put tanks near ridge if your marines can be on the other side of the ridge to stop an immortal from getting there and taking out all the tanks. The advantage of tanks on the ridge is if your opponent has to group their zealots and attack towards your tanks, the zealots group up as they're going towards that choke point, and the splash damage is more effective. The weakness, like I said before, is that if you don't have marines in position, a single immortal can come in and he can take all the tank fire here and then take out a lot of the tanks as well. And as you see what happened here, QXC's army got pretty much destroyed in this engagement due to that simple thing. Now, the big difference, QXC probably wasn't going to win this engagement no matter what. But one of the cool things to notice, if you want to maximize, let me rewind this just a bit. If you want to maximize the effectiveness of your tank pushes, right? Your marine tank pushes, the most important things are, one, the marines in front of the immortal, and then two, try to focus fire those tanks. So you can see this immortal, he's already taken 2 tank shots. If we zoom into this and just look at this in slow motion, you can see how effective the immortal is. He takes another 2, 3, 4. He basically already took 10 tank shots alone. And those 10 tank shots could have killed all 5 of these stalkers. So it could have been a little bit more cost efficient for QXC. Of course, he wasn't going to win this engagement in any case because there's too many immortals and too many warpins from Deer. It's a very difficult to win these engagements against a mid-sized Protoss army without the stim pack and medevac support. Of course, QXC made a very, in most cases, a great decision in trying to attack his opponent due to the fact that the expansion was late from Deer and the DTs probably slowed down his army. But again, Deer is a guy who can kind of do everything. So he was able to just have enough to defend as well. Now, Deer realizes 2 things. 1, he just took a big win over QXC's army. But 2, what tech does Deer have? He just has gateways, Robo for Immortals. He's got a couple upgrades, or he's got 1 armor upgrade working on a 2nd armor upgrade. But that's it. There's no Templar, no Colossi, and it's 14 minutes in, and he knows, okay, my opponent gets stim and medevacs, it's going to look ugly for me. So he's trying to do some damage and kill some SCVs, because even though he broke the army, economically speaking, QXC is going to have a better economy due to mules and a roughly even worker count. Even economy, stronger composition because he's going to have stim and medevacs. Deer wants to get some damage done because he knows it's going to be about 2 minutes to get that big power hitting units. If we can't do damage done in the next 2 minutes, QXC might be able to hit a really strong timing before he gets the Colossi and or the Psy Storms down the field. He's massing up his units here. And of course, QXC doesn't really have too much to defend. It's a single bunker here. If you look at the army value, it's about 1,100 for QXC, 2,700 for Deer. So 2.5 times more army strength in Deer right now. But again, QXC has the bunkers. He knows he just has to defend now, because as time goes on, he'll get Stim Medivacs and he'll be okay. Good force field on the bunker takes that down very quickly. But now with SCVs in front to tank for the Marines, that the power of the Stim is going to force Deer back. Now, the good news for Deer is, of course, he's killed a decent amount of SCVs. Instead of being behind by 5, all of a sudden he's up by 13. So I think he got about 20 worker killed there, maybe 16. I think he had 4 from earlier. But now with the Medivacs and the number of Stim Marines out in the field, it's enough damage output from QXC that Deer is going to be forced back. So the last thing I want to talk about in this game is we're going to fast forward through this pretty quickly to cut to a pretty cool part. It's a little cat and mouse game. Deer realizes he can't kill his opponent. He's trying to go for the Colossi. We can see here the tech transition to get that area effect damage out, because this type of army you really need to AoE. QXC is trying to find a weakness because he knows his third base is much later than Deer's. He knows his worker count was hurt by the attack. But unfortunately, Deer's army is just too much bigger than QXC's here. You can see he's got about 600 resources advantage. He can defend a choke pretty well. So QXC is starting to feel a little bit desperate as this game goes forward, knowing his opponent has a third much faster, and as his opponent gets a couple Colossi out, it's going to start looking bad for him. So he's trying to make something happen here, and what he did is he pulled his SCVs to go for this big attack here. So he's got about 20 SCVs with his army. That's about half of his workers, so his economy is much lower, and he's trying to get a lot of damage done. Now, if you take a look at the compositions, right, there's 2 Colossi, not quite range finish, will be finished in a few seconds, and the rest of the army is halfly split between Zealots and Stalkers, but the Zealots are a good part of the damage. Stalkers don't really do much more than snipe Vikings in these engagements. QXC, of course, if you look at his composition, he's got a good amount of Hellbats, just a lot of bio in general, so a very unit-heavy composition, and that's why Deer wants to defend a choke point. Because at a choke point, it's hard to get all these units up to point. And as long as he has force fields, he can quite easily cut some of these in half, get a couple free Hellbats, a couple free SCVs, and take a nice decisive win there. QXC realizes those small choke points aren't going to work when he wants to get the SCVs and the Hellbats into action. And of course, the force fields are going to stop that. So where does he pick the fight? He circles around here. And the important thing is he knew that because he threatened this ramp, it's very easy to say, okay, attacking this ramp was a big mistake from QXC. But the reason he wanted to attack up there, he wanted to put his opponent's mind on this section. If Deer's thinking about defending this area and his army's here, right? Look at the movement. For QXC, Deer can't see him, right? If you look at Deer's vision, as soon as QXC backed up into the dark, Deer didn't know if he was going left or if he was going back up this same position. So he kind of stayed where he was. And very quickly, QXC went down here. And what's important is that QXC can take this zone right here before his opponent gets past these pylons. Because as we can see right now, Deer's army is super gridlocked with these pylons here. So much of his army is he's got Narcon, he's got 10 Zealots, and the Zealots can't get through. And if the Zealots can't get through, his only damage output is 2 Colossi. And Colossi are good, but they're not going to take on the whole army by themselves. And now these Immortals, or these Archons here, are having a hard time getting action as well. The Zealots finally get through, but there's only about 3 or 4 left by the time they get through. And QXC takes this fight pretty convincingly, considering the advantages Deer had going into here with the faster third, the stronger competition, and the better upgrades. And again, now still he has the Stalkers and Immortals left, but those aren't really that good. In the engagement when a Terran has a lot of Medivacs and Stim Bio to support their army. So QXC goes on. He's going to win this game. Let's fast forward through the ending moments. He's very cost efficient with this Medivac Bio supported army. Deer's going to push him back for a second. But even though he's pushing him back, it's a situation where if you look at the economy, QXC has a lot less workers, which means he has a lot better army. He has a high Medivac count, so we can just go ahead and finish this game off in the next minute or two. So what was cool about this game, we're going to stop it there, is a couple of factors. One is QXC beat Deer, which is awesome, because Deer's one of the best players from Korea, plays for the Pro League team, or the Kespa team, I guess, playing in Pro League, STX Seoul. But a couple things to take note from that is, one, if you're trying to defend a one-base Blink Stalker build, always give up your natural, go for siege tanks, bunkers, if you have the factory. If you don't have the factory, don't try to start it, but if you have it already set up, get a couple siege tanks, a couple bunkers, build up your defense, and then move out. Because if you have 2 command centers, you're going to be ahead economically, even if you don't have your natural, just due to the fact you can double produce SCVs, and you have 2 mules at your disposal. The other thing is to understand from both the Protoss and Terran side, when your army is stronger than your opponents. So Protoss early game, the gateway units are typically better than Marines or Marauders up until a Terran gets Stimpak and Medivacs. Then the Terran army tends to be a little bit stronger until Protoss can get either the Colossi on the field or the High Templar. And then last and most important, engaging your opponent. You always want to make your opponent stuck in a choke point. So earlier QXC was kind of stuck in a choke and Force Fields really cut his army in half. Then later QXC was able to move around and find an angle where it would be Deer who was stuck in a choke and his Zealots couldn't engage because they had a hard time getting through that choke and had the Terran Bio Army. So I hope you guys enjoyed this analysis of Deer versus QXC. We'll take a short break and be on to our next segment.